Yeah, all right, let's go through some of the papers this morning, see what's making the list. We're joined this morning by political commentator Andy Williams and also former special advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Good to see you both this morning, gents. What are we starting with this morning? I haven't got.
Well, I think we'll.
Let me pinch this.
The by-election is still out.
Well, yeah.
There's only one place to start. Yep.
On the back of that interview, it's a fascinating interview with Richard Tice. I'm getting to know Richard quite well. We keep seeing each other in these kinds of environments. But the interesting thing is, you know, you're absolutely right, Ellie. To your point, there's a real choice for people at the general election. People do vote differently in general elections, I think, and. People, you know, who decided to stay at home during these two by-elections, the turnout was incredibly low. So I think, you know, there is...
But it always is, Charlie. It always is.
Exactly, which is why I don't think there's a clear picture that's emerging for all of the celebrations that are taking place. The turnout was still incredibly low, so it's still all to play for. But if you are in Kingswood, as you say, you know, if you vote Reform, you do get Labour. So I think, you know, people will have to really ponder over that decision and think about what they're going to do when the next general election comes.
What is Rishi Sunak possibly going to come out and say, do you think, this morning? I mean, what can he say? He's thrown everything at this. He's had 14 years. Well, they've had 14 years.
I suppose, but in a sense, he hasn't thrown everything at it. They've not really pushed and campaigned in these seats, have they?
Well, I think you've got to take into account everything. So the context of the by-elections, how they've come about, haven't been easy. So if you have a former government minister, so in the case of Chris Skidmore, who resigned, critical of the government, critical of the Prime Minister, that's not going to be particularly endearing to his electorate to go out and then vote Conservative again, I wouldn't have thought. Similarly, in Wellingborough, if, you know, you have an MP that is facing a series of allegations, you know, the idea that people are then going to sort of rally around and come out, you may as well.
Rally around his partner. Yeah. Was that a stupid decision?
Well, I think it was... look, you know, I think she's a local councillor, so she's, you know, she's got her own right to be a local candidate, but whether it's the right decision or not is
it's a terrible decision, obviously a terrible decision. And I think Charlie says there's not a clear picture emerging. A very clear picture has emerged, which is people are fed up, sick and tired of the Tories after 14 years. This is a disastrous night for them. Let's be clear, it's an absolute disaster. They've been thrashed, particularly in Wellingborough, a really, really safe seat. And yes, a bad candidate, absolutely, no doubt about that. They have been thrashed, and Richard just now said that the Tories are tired and old and toxic, and I think that is a very settled view of the British people now, is that they're fed up with them.
Well, I'm neither tired, old or toxic, I don't think, but I'm still here sort of trying to make light and analyse the actual results in total. But I think, look, you know, the circumstances in which the by-elections came about is never helpful for the government. The Prime Minister will obviously have to come out later on, either today or over the weekend, to say that by-elections, you know, the same old lines, you know, by-elections never go well for sitting governments. Of course. There's still a lot of work to do.
But this is the first time that any sitting government has lost... What, is it 10?
9 by-elections in one parliament.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty grim picture, isn't it, Andy?
Really grim picture, massive swing, and I can't remember how many, how much the majority has been diminished since 2019. Lots of seats lost, and I know that there have been MPs on all sides of the House who have, for various reasons, had to resign or whatever. But no, it's a really, really, really bad picture. The polling is terrible. I think what's interesting, by the way, is that all of the polls which show that the Conservative vote is continuing to diminish, they've kind of been proved right. The polling really held up last night, with Reform as well, on 10 to 13%.
Yes, but also the Labour vote didn't increase by much, did it, in real terms? I mean, you talk about the turnouts and all the rest of it, but I don't know which seat it was. I don't know if it was Kingswood or Wellingborough, but the Labour vote was up by 100. Right,
but, I mean, it doesn't matter, because the point is that if you've got 10% of people going to Reform, that is a massive problem. And, you know, Richard's right, Reform are going to have a huge impact on this election. If you have 10% of voters going from Conservative to Reform, that's enough to totally turn the election. And actually, you know, 44% in Kingswood there is a great result for Labour. So obviously, over the next few days, what you'll hear is there's no great enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, nobody's pro-Labour, it's an anti-Conservative vote. Well, actually, that's what lots of people said in 1997. Labour got a majority of 166, and I think, honestly, Labour are going to go into expectation management mode now, but I think we're on course for exactly the same result.
OK. Charlie?
Yes. What's the... Sorry, it's well, it was, it's the same old stuff that you'd hear, as you'd expect to hear, I should say. So, look, I don't think that's the case. I think, look, if you just go back to those figures, you were just showing the infographic on your screens there, where you're right, in Kingswood, I think the winning candidate had just over 11,000 votes. They came second or a third, just with 18,000 votes at the last general election, just demonstrating that you can win on an absolutely decimated turnout by the local electorate. And it will just be, I think, in a general election campaign, when there is a real choice to be made, when both parties are going hammer and tongs at each other about what their priorities are and what they can deliver, it will be a very, very tough choice.
Why didn't the Tory party fight these seats strongly? Why wasn't there a three-line whip to get up there and campaign?
Well, I think they've
just given up.
I think it's always going to be difficult, as I said before, in the circumstances in which the by-elections have come about, and you don't just give up normally, especially because of the message that then sends
and the optics. Yeah.
Well, I think I wouldn't say that they've given up. I mean, I'm sure there's been lots of people that have worked there very incredibly hard. In fact, I know there would have been people.
Charlie, don't you think it's the case that, if we're honest, the majority of cabinet ministers, of senior people in the Conservative Party, in the heart of hearts, they know it's game over, and that's why they're not bothering?
No, I don't. I don't think that at all, actually. I think people know that there is a fight to be had, and there's a real... you're talking about, Conservative activists and MPs not going up to those by-elections. Well, the public didn't turn out to vote in those by-elections. So there is clearly a lack of will to be engaged in the political debate at the minute, probably because there's been so much politics that's ongoing, and people are just, I think, probably waiting for the general election. But they're also, on the back of your fantastic, might I say, interview and your People's Panel with the Prime Minister on Monday night, the poll that came out of the back, these were undecided voters, Stephen. And they came out, and I was listening to the interviews on the back of your brilliant hosting with Chris Hope afterwards, who said that they were still undecided, that they still didn't actually think that the Prime Minister had done badly, but they still weren't convinced that, this is all terrible. Some people thought he did better than they expected.
Well, on the straw poll, 50% said they would vote Conservative.
And there you are.
But it's going to be interesting to see when and if Keir Starmer agrees to do one, what the straw poll... Because I think partly it's the being in the sphere of a leader like that, and it's quite swaying. Yeah,
and I think, look, I mean, the general election campaign will be a huge test for Labour and for Keir Starmer, because the obvious question that lots of voters will ask, particularly people who are on the fence, will be, well, what's your offer? And I really do believe that people are fed up of this government, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to put their tick in the Labour box. And so there is a big job to be done for Starmer and his team to persuade people that they should vote Labour, but also tell people what it is that a Labour government will offer. Because actually, as we know, if you ask people what is it that Labour will do, people don't really know. And so that's why something like,
But then we don't know with the Tories either, do we? I mean, the Daily Mail saying this morning, be bold and go for big tax cuts, Mr Hunt. Well, we don't know. I mean, the PM on Monday was sort of trying to indicate that he wanted to talk about tax a lot, which would indicate tax cuts are on the way, but they do seem to be toing and froing on this issue.
Well, I think what they've got to do is certainly position themselves to look as though that they're dealing with the economy in the right way. So inflation has obviously come down. Yes, there were some figures out yesterday that showed that over the last 3 months, at the back end of last year, that the UK went into a recession. I think that is widely accepted, that is sort of old news, as it were. It's just, that's just because of the way in which interest rates are up, inflation is coming down, and the economy is starting to grow. We'll get those new figures in a couple of months' time. But I think they'll want to go into the March budget and making sure that they are doing things that appeal to Conservative voters, and that does include tax cuts.
OK, gents...